We should naturally be able to easily go from dinner to breakfast time without needing to eat. A new study just came out recently about women who simply fasted 13 hours. 13 hours is nothing. It's dinner to breakfast, people. I mean, it's nothing. Had a lower recurrence of breast cancer than those who were having a snack at bedtime or ate, in the middle of the night for whatever reason. That's not even, that's
you don't
not,
have to try really, or change your lifestyle.
And if you really were metabolically flexible, having your dinner, going to bed and eating 12 to 16 hours later, you should naturally be in low-grade ketosis. Naturally, we don't go there anymore. So we have to push ourselves now. We have to kind of force it a little bit. So, it's okay to go, it's okay to feel hunger.
Hello friends, it's Mike Maltz with High Intensity Health. Thanks for tuning back into another episode. Very excited to be with my friend Dr. Nasha Winters today, the co-author of the Metabolic Approach to Cancer, which I was telling you offline that, guys, I really think this is one of the most comprehensive nutrition books that's out right now. So many books I think are recycling like old information, and this is really, you're bringing in a lot of new information. You're like teasing me a little bit. I was reading this on the way over, like dog ears and highlights and all this sort of stuff in there. So we're going to talk about nutritional ketosis, different metabolic therapies when it comes to cancer. Cool. And really this idea, I think it's great to launch from, that in the traditional realm, I think a lot of folks are focused on this idea that cancer is kind of this immune, like kind of a genetic immune disorder, but there's so many metabolic attributes. So let's start off with where the lens is in the conventional world and then how your approach is so different.
Perfect. So, well, first of all, this is awesome to be with you. Yeah. And yes, I appreciate it. It means a lot when I see someone's dog earring and highlighting so much throughout the book. It's exciting to see that it's well received.
Sure.
This is a culmination of 25 years of my own exploration in that what has been available to us is that lens you're talking about, which is the conventional medical view of this somatic concept of cancer, which is a very DNA damaged base of where cancer starts. And we've been barking up that tree for a very long time, about 70, 75 years now, and it hasn't gotten us very far. And it's not to say that it's not valid. It's just to say that it's probably not enough to just be looking from that angle. And so what has started to happen in the last, especially 10 years, we've really seen the big changes in the last couple of years, is that we're starting to understand that maybe that's not where the process of cancer starts, is at the DNA level, DNA damaged level, I should say, but backing it down to what's going on with the mitochondria itself. So if you have happy, healthy, functioning, the right number, the right efficiency of mitochondria, your little powerhouses in your cells, then they are your armor against DNA damage, which then can precipitate into a cancering or chronic illness process. So we're backing it up a little bit more to more the root cause of where this is coming from. And it's starting to make a wave in the world of oncology, and we're starting to talk about it much more, and we're starting to make a difference. And so I think that's exciting with the field of oncology today.
And is that because the mitochondria are kind of leaking free radicals and kind of if they are dysfunctional or damaged, like you talk about in the book, that they can kind of, like their exhaust is more prevalent and therefore that can cause a DNA damage that affects like cellular replication, DNA repair? Yeah,
and someone, I can't remember where I read this recently, but they talk about, we talk about the mitochondria, they have this biochemical respiration. And someone said it just so simply, that said basically when your mitochondria stop breathing appropriately, they get sick. And that's where they ferment, and that's when everything changes. And that's where you end up getting, like you said, the leaks or the energy depletions or the changes in other chemical pathways in the body. And everything just becomes really vulnerable to damage from all the things we're exposed to today, from certain dietary influences to things from our environment to emotions and high stress living in the Western world.
Yeah. Really, really fascinating. And is that mitochondrial DNA becoming damaged too? I remember reading something about that in the book, that if you don't have mitochondrial DNA damage, then there may not be such an prevalence, or the risk may not be there.
And that's based on a lot of Dr. Thomas Seyffert's work and his unbelievably intense and groundbreaking work on cancer as a metabolic disease that really kind of shook up the oncology world a little bit several years ago. But that's basically what he's shown, is that if the DNA or the mitochondria themselves are hardy, you just don't get that DNA damage. Just it's infallible in some way. So he's like, you literally can't have DNA damage without damaged mitochondria, and you can't have DNA damage with healthy mitochondria.
Interesting.
And so I don't know if you've heard about Mina Bissell. She actually spoke this year at an Oncology Association of Naturopathic Physicians conference. She's, I think, 35 years into conventional oncology research. She's pretty world renowned. And she did a great TED Talk several years back about what she calls the extracellular matrix. That's what we all learned in our physiology. I tend to call it more of the terrain from just a vitalistic perspective. But she was able to show, just like Thomas Seyffert's work, that basically the medium in which those mitochondria are living and the nucleus of that mitochondria within the cytoplasm of the cell, you can turn them on and off at will, basically, with what you feed them. So if you feed them really bad inflammatory cytokines, you can turn them into damaged mitochondria that precipitate illness. If you feed them high, nutrient-dense foods, you can change their expression. And so it was really cool to have these two very cell line centric researchers start to see that you can literally make happy or unhappy mitochondrial function at will with what you feed them in their medium that they grow up in, but also within the cytoplasm around their nucleus.
Wow.
So pretty amazing.
And that really speaks volumes to kind of a core theme that you talk about in the book is the terrain. And so what a lot of people get kind of down this hole or this road of like looking at just macronutrients. Like if your macro is fit, then it's okay. Like it doesn't really matter about food quality, and that's what you really harp on in the book is, it's not about like the protein, it's what your animals ate. Like the animals that you're eating are eating, and the food quality, which I think is key. Yeah. And it weaves in all these different components you talk about in the book, from the microbiome to the immune system to insulin sensitivity, toxins, all of that, which affect at some level mitochondrial function.
Totally.
Really, really key.
Yeah.
And so one strategy I think that gets a lot of people excited when it comes to like mitochondrial medicine is the ketogenic diet, because like to burn fat for fuel or as ketones, you need to have mitochondria. So is that kind of why you weave that therapy into the context of cancer?
Absolutely. I mean, we will use glucose primarily as our fuel source, but it's less efficient. And you will make ATP, obviously, at the end of that biochemical pathway, but you will actually make more ATP more efficiently and with less steps, if you will, when you use ketones as the primary fuel source. And it's just kind of an exciting time when you have a body that's so burdened and overwhelmed. And I mean, anybody dealing with a chronic illness or cancer, they're exhausted. And the number one symptom and first symptom really of mitochondrial damage is fatigue. And that's probably what every doctor, whether you're a naturopath, a chiropractor, a medical doctor, a DO, it doesn't matter what your training is. That's probably what we hear the most from our patients is they're tired. And that is a clue that their mitochondria are not as effective and efficient, and you could help them by giving them a more efficient fuel source to kind of ramp things up again, get things moving in an effective way. So that's kind of a simple starting point and a nice base camp for a lot of other therapies and modalities, whether you're working with cancer or other chronic illness. So it's like, think of that as the base camp of it, and then you can overlay all these other therapies that become much more effective when you're not so exhausted, in the mitochondrial function. Yeah.
Is there another, I'm thinking like a biochemical test, like a lot of practitioners love just like testing, right?
I'm one of them.
Yeah, I mean, it's great. Like some patients don't need that data, but other patients love to see that confirmatory data. Like, oh yeah, my mitochondria are dysfunctional. So do you look at like organic acids? Or I'm just trying to think of like one test, maybe a traditional lab test too, that we could look at and say, you know what, I know you're tired, and then this test confirms that maybe your mitochondria are dysfunctional. What would you offer for folks?
Well, the simplest one, and my husband, who's a biochemist, and he was by training in undergrad was a cancer drug design doc, pre-doctorate program, did research in this, went into working for Merck in pharmaceutical sales, and now he's, does laboratory medicine, and biochemical nutrition has always been his passion. And he's been incredibly interested in the function and form of the mitochondria since undergrad. And what he taught me, interestingly enough, as a biochemist, not as a clinician, was to look at the simple blood test lactase dehydrogenase. We used to run that routinely in all of our patients with a Chem 20 panel, but today we do just a Chem panel. And you skip out on that little bugger all across the board. And it's probably one of the simplest, least expensive, most telling lab to run. And so in simple terms, if the LDH is elevated, and I'm talking functionally elevated, because remember, our labs are based on the average of the population, and we are not a very healthy population these days. So the skew, the bell-shaped curve gets a little bit fatter along the way, so we're not really talking optimal with folks. But an LDH, depending on whether it's a Quest lab or a LabCorp lab, may have a range of upwards of 600 or a range of just over 200. Functionally speaking, on the lower one, you want it to be below 175 on your lactase dehydrogenase or under 450. And so what I've learned from a biochemist perspective and how this all functions through the Krebs cycle and whatnot is that the LDH is on, so if it's elevated, your mitochondria are off. Very, very simple, very basic. And it has worked really well for me in analyzing what's going on with my patients for 20 plus years.
That's brilliant. Yeah. Let's talk about why. Some people may not make that connection. So lactate, and then it kind of gets into this whole Warburg effect and this whole leaky mitochondria. So what is a high LDH? What is that leading us to infer? That's
letting us know that the mitochondria have stopped breathing and they're moving into that fermentation, and they're starting to basically make up for the damage or the deficiencies by starting to ferment and absorb more nutrients from all different resources of the body. So that's a clue that there's a metabolic shift happening. And I always tell folks that if you're dealing with cancer, as long as it stays in the normal metabolic, cycling, it doesn't matter if you have a tumor or tumor burden or tumor cells floating about. Everything's sort of at peace and in synergy with what's happening in the system. But once it makes that fuel shift and starts to ferment, stops breathing, that's when it gets dangerous. That's when it starts to get the upper hand, and the cancer cell scooches the healthy cell out of the way and gets behind the driver, gets behind the wheel of the car and starts driving the show and starts changing the communication in the whole network, if you will. And so when we start to see that happening, instead of waiting for the car to burst into flames, we can start to make adjustments at that time just by watching that lactase dehydrogenase start to go up. So that can be elevated in areas where you have bone breakdown. It can be elevated with kidney or liver dysfunction. It can be elevated with sugar metabolism issues. There can be a lot of reasons why the LDH is elevated. So I don't typically look at it just as a standalone test. I look at it in conjunction with a C-reactive protein, a sedimentation rate, and other labs, kind of the big picture. Take that under the hood look. But if it's elevated along with an elevated CRP and along with a sed rate, we basically know that the metabolic process has shifted out of the favor of being healthy and into the favor of thriving in a cancer environment. And so those are some things that we can start to preempt. And you can run the more expensive, fancier OAT tests, organic acids profiles. You can even run like the 8-OHDG test for DNA damage, really simple test. You can get really fancy-pantsy with it, but most of my folks don't have resources or doctors willing to order those tests or know what to do with the information if they get them. So a simple, Chem 20 panel can tell us a lot of information, because at least you get a sed rate and an LDH, and then we'll run a C-reactive protein along with that.
That's really, really good.
Yeah.
But it's funny, I've noticed since getting into this space about 2006, there's less and less tests being run, even through the conventional, like you're saying, Quest and LabCorp. So you have to tell your doctor or practitioner, like, no, put on the GGT and put on these different alkaline phosphates. Yeah, I do want that actually, believe it or not. I want to know that data.
Yeah.
So
or the differential on your CBC. It's like, yeah.
Yeah, and so I think that's important. So for folks listening, is there different LDH subtypes though? That's what I've seen too. So you just click one and it'll get them all.
Well, I run an LDH, and if it's elevated out of my functional ranges, then some tests will let me reflex immediately into an isoenzyme. Most won't. Okay, most people, first of all, I will tell you this. Most people, when I ask for an LDH, and we're talking conventional trained doctors, naturopathic trained doctors around the country, they order an LDL. No one even knows what the hell an LDH is anymore, which is a little frightening. Yeah. Just to put it that way. I mean, that is probably the biggest thing happening when I try to order these labs with patients around the country is no one knows what it is.
They get confused.
Exactly. So then they, of course, don't know about LDH isoenzymes. So if I do see it elevated, I will then kind of circle back around and order the isoenzyme so that I can look at exactly where the breakdown of communication is happening within the cell. And so it may point me in the direction of, oh, this is more of a cardiovascular event, or this is more of the liver's really struggling right now, or hey, you're really breaking down bone really fast, or this is really a tumor dense process, a metabolic fermentation process happening.
And we don't know exactly where to go. Then we might look at a PET test or something down the line.
Exactly. Yeah. Or a circulating tumor cell assay through something like Biocept, or or just going deeper into maybe looking at insulin growth factor and hemoglobin A1C and insulin to see if it's about that fermentation sugar bomb process that's going on. So we can just add more labs to it if we need to and dig deeper. I try never to just guess anymore, because you don't have to. That's the beauty, is we can be so much more individualized and specific now. And that's, I think lab interpretation is a dying art. Yeah.
People just want to put the data into a computer. Say, spit me out a report, tell me what supplements to take, and I'm good to go.
It's so much more complicated. You got to bring the rest of the picture in. Right.
Obviously, robots and computers don't have the error rates that maybe humans would have, but it's still a great skill to have, just like cooking and exercise and everything else. So to kind of summarize, so the LDH is going to increase because it's dealing with lactic acid. So this fermentation is going on, and that is bad because that kind of enables these adaptations within the cancer cell that enable it to evade immune surveillance and metastasize and all that.
Exactly. And it also, when that starts to happen, those cells also become very resistant to treatments, so multiple drug resistance, and doesn't respond to signaled cell death, so apoptosis doesn't happen, and it basically starts to have the potential to overcome, like jump its fence, if you will, and start to migrate around the building. That's when it gets dangerous, because in the first few hallmarks of cancer, where it stops listening to cell death signals and starts to proliferate uncontrollably, that can even happen in healthy cells on a regular basis. But once it breaks free of its region and starts to move about, that's where Western medicine really starts to fall short of having a lot of options. So once we get into metastasis and invasion, it's a lot more challenging from a conventional perspective to treat.
Wow.
Yeah. And that's simply because now the metabolic change is completely, the foundation of what's going on.
Right. And so just to kind of emphasize this, drive it home for our listeners and folks watching this, it's not that there was a DNA damage event that caused a metabolic shift. It was a metabolic shift. So that's, if we're talking about like what is functional medicine or integrative medicine, how is it different from conventional? We're looking at the root cause.
You got it.
So if we want to prevent cancer and treat it or keep it at bay, that is what we need to focus on. That's why the book title is The Metabolic Approach to Cancer, to really, that's key.
And I appreciate that, because that kind of going to the very beginning of your first question, of where has the difference been, we've started further down the rabbit hole to look at this from the DNA damage point first, but we can do so much more behind that to prevent the DNA damage that then causes these mutations and causes cancer and chronic illness processes. So that's where the communication has been a problem or lacking in conventional medicine, and it's frankly more difficult to have to look upstream and to look at more of a metabolic approach, because it's going to be very individualized. It's not like, oh, this is the cause for everybody's DNA damage, this one thing. No, it's like, well, what made that mitochondria weak? And we all have a different blueprint that makes us, Like you and I could sit here and huff gasoline, and I would have, because I have a GST1 absent gene issue. I would get very violently ill within seconds, and you might be able to just sit there and be like, I love the smell of gasoline in the morning. Like it might be very different. And my DNA and mitochondria are crushing under that tiny waft, and yours are just like, bring it on. That's some differences that we are able to also start to explore why not all of us are walking around cancering like mofos.
Right.
So yes, a little difference there.
Yeah. And so that's the power of what you talk about in the book a lot is the phytonutrients. So a phytonutrient rich diet that's low carb, so it's still ketogenic friendly, but so we're giving that buffer via the cruciferous vegetables and so forth. So that's part of the therapy too, because I think a lot of people, when they hear that they have cancer or they're going into chemo, the doctors are saying watch the antioxidants. So they're like, oh, no curcumin, no this, no turmeric, no, can't do any of that. Right. But you're like, no, that's we need to upregulate those enzymes.
Well, and it's funny because, my gosh, we've had multiple studies that have come out saying that antioxidants really aren't a problem. I mean, if you're going to eat truly an antioxidant void diet, you would be living on distilled water and cardboard. So that's what's really hard, is if you've got doctors who are really pushing patients to stay away from the blueberries and the broccoli during treatment, well, then they're also going to have to pretty much avoid everything else too. There's kind of, instead of them being antioxidant, the conversation must be more about redox reagent, that it can be both, breaking down and building up simultaneously just by whatever the body needs. The body is so wise. We seem to think that we have the upper hand of how to overcome it or override certain processes, but healthy cells have this ability to adapt. So if we're feeding it a lot of antioxidant rich foods, they can utilize that and protect themselves. Whereas cancer cells can't adapt so much. They're metabolically inflexible. That's the actual term that we use in that. And so they can be hit with things like high dose vitamin C and lice in that environment, or they can be hit with oxygen or ozone or different things that can just make it much more vulnerable than our healthy cells. And so having a diet that is sort of well-rounded in these rich phytonutrients is a smart bomb. We don't have to think about it. Our cells get to determine, hey, we're going to use this to protect the healthy cells, and we're going to use this to kill off the unhealthy cells. It's pretty simple. It's the adaptogenic concept from Chinese medicine. It's like you just give it, and the body uses it the way it needs to in any environment.
Yeah.
So
that's really fascinating. Yeah, if you look at the research like on sulforaphane, it's actually a mild stressor to the cells. And so that's kind of the thing. So is fasting kind of like this mild hormetic response, and so we're weeding out some of these sicker, weaker cells potentially.
Exactly. And I love it. I mean, hormesis, is one of the things that fascinates me, that in our culture, we have become so much, it's got to be 74 degrees all year round, constantly, and you have to eat, you have to graze, whether you need it or not, every 4 hours, constantly. You are never uncomfortable, you're never in pain. I mean, we're not allowed to feel discomfort, cold, hot, hunger, physical discomfort ever. It's not okay in our culture. We've got a med for that, And so we've gotten away from those kind of natural hormetic processes. I mean, for someone to willfully want to go and, like, one of my favorite things to do is to get into a lobster pot hot spring up at Pagosa. Cool. For 113 degrees, hang out there as long as I can until I'm scalding like a lobster, and then I lay in the river, which, the running through there, which in the winter is my favorite when there's ice chips coming down it. Now, everyone else watches you and thinks you're nuts, but it is the most invigorating thing. And now we've been able to take that into things like saunas and cryotherapy units and, hiking at elevation without oxygen. I mean, all these things that we can do to stress ourselves. Now, we did that for millennia without fancy devices or paying money to do it. So, but it is, with the types of things you talked about with the food, a lot of the best anti-cancer rich, micronutrients are poisons, and they are stressing the cells a little bit, but the healthy cells can adapt, the unhealthy cells can't. So it's like I said, little smart bombs moving throughout our body.
It's like little interval training for cells.
Yeah, exactly. A little
intensity.
volume, a little volume dialing ups and downs where needed. That's perfect. Yeah.
That's brilliant.
Yeah.
It's funny, it's kind of off topic, but the Airbnb that I stayed at last night here in Durango, the lady was like, you know what, and because I take cold showers all the time, or I use a garden hose in the morning, to kind of stimulate that cold thermogenesis, brown fat, all that sort of stuff. She's like, oh yeah, and by the way, the heat on the shower, because it's like a little shed in the back where I was staying, they built it into a home and stuff like that. Yeah. She's like, yeah, there's no running hot water, and I was like, oh cool, I don't need hot water anyway. The only downside I found with like taking cold showers and all that is the heat and the soap really help with like smells, and so you gotta shower a little bit more frequently.
It doesn't quite dissolve the layers of funk factor. Is that what you're telling me?
That's the only downside.
I love it.
But that probably is skin microbes, and you talk a lot about the microbiome, so maybe we can kind of talk a little bit about that. So all these phytonutrients that we've been exploring, low carb diets, phytonutrient rich, these colors also are good for our gut bacteria.
Exactly.
And there's a lot of research showing that our mitochondria come from microorganisms,
Absolutely.
right? So there's a lot
That's
of
where we
there.
started. Yeah. It makes sense to me. I love that when we go, okay, our microbiome was mitochondria, right? And so why it's so cool that we're finally in science coming full circle to have these conversations around the mitochondria, about metabolic approaches, about the microbiome. It's like we're all just starting to have the funds and the questions and the answers in research of things that have been happening since the beginning of time. So it's just kind of groovy. I laugh that we've got this whole new concept called biohacking, and I'm totally into it. It's fascinating to me, but my God, naturopaths were the original biohackers, and, the old, water curists and all these things. Like, we were playing with these things without giving it the name or the scientific evidence of why it just felt good. We just thrived in it. And so it's just so funny to come full circle into that. But the microbiome is huge. We talked before you started rolling about our food supply and how we are really kind of brought down to just a few main crops. I mean, we're kind of basically eating about 8 foods. We're really gone into the concept of this monocropping, and that has happened in our microbiome as well. Microbiome diversity is what gave us health and vitality. And now we're just down to just a few crops in there, if you will, which is really hard to rebuild from. Yeah.
So do you think that's, in addition to early life exposure, birthing methods, C-section versus vaginal delivery, lack of breastfeeding, all that sort of stuff, is that, in your eyes, and I've seen a lot of research there too, that lack of food diversity translates into loss of bacterial diversity, which affects the whole gut immune metabolic axis.
Totally. And that's where, in our book, we talk, you also mentioned we really focus on quality, but we also try to focus on finding old heirloom seeds, getting out and wild harvesting, and looking for foods that you may have never heard of or seen before. That's why it's fun to travel, go to places and say, well, what did your grandma eat? What was the main food that you had at that time? So if you travel just even outside of your own town, you're going to find, things that people ate for millennia that we've just kind of ignored. We all want our giant like Olathe sweet corn and our giant apples, they're just big sugar bombs, but we have gotten far away from the tiny little tart, sour, like May apples and crab apples and other apples that had a little bit of poison that we've actually made from like May apple, for instance, we've made chemotherapy. Crazy. Okay. Things like that some of these natural foods that we had forever, we took the constituents out of and turned them into pharmaceuticals. 80% of our pharmacopoeia comes from plants. So that's pretty cool. And yet we just keep sort of pushing them further and further away and say, no, the only real medicine is this pharmacy, not pharmacy. Yeah.
Isn't that funny?
Go figure.
Yeah, that's pretty wild. So when it comes to like the microbiome in cancer, where do you like to start with people? Are you looking more just big picture, looking at diet, stress, and all that, and then by extension of that, the microbiome health will generally increase over time?
Yeah, I think you nailed it. I have colleagues who are perfect. They've got the funnel vision of knowing exactly which organism causes this illness or heals this illness, and they've gotten it down to literally a science and into this very bio-individualized approach. But I have found for myself, I tend to be a big picture kind of gal, and I also know my patients well enough to know that I can overwhelm them very easily with this information. So if we just sort of say, let's diversify, we say that with our finances as well. Let's diversify your food, which will then in turn diversify your microbiome. And let's bring in some foods that maybe you have never eaten before, or that you stopped eating, or that you forgot that you used to eat. Think about what you used to eat when you'd go to grandma's house or great grandma's house when you were a kid. And suddenly people are like, oh my God, we used to always have, borscht or leeks in everything, or, just different things, different tiny berries like choke cherries they've harvested off and turned into different things that we were like, God, I've never even thought about these foods in years or decades. And so when folks start to go that round, there's also sort of this interesting kind of primal memory that comes through with it as well. We really want folks to get back out in the garden, even if they have a tiny apartment, and just to plant a little thing of basil in their house that sits in the window. There's something very powerful to connect with your food directly versus, it comes from a cellophane wrapper.
Right.
Yeah. Which has its own issues.
Yeah, and it's triple washed with chlorine and fluorine, and it's totally sterile and everything.
Exactly. Like going out to eat, you think, oh gosh, I'm going to go have a salad. It's so good. But for somebody like me, I have a very sensitive system and microbiome that when the stuff that they wash the lettuce with makes me super sick. So I might be doing great by eating this beautiful salad, but whatever they tried to clean it with just completely, brought havoc to my whole digestive system. And so we are just exposed to so many things that take us further and further and further away from the way food was intended. I mean, even on our refrigerator, we have a magnet that says, eat organic food, or as your grandparents called it, food. It's like, we had to think about this in such a different way now. It's bizarre, but yeah. And I don't know if you know Joel Salatin's book or his work. He's kind of a wild character, but he has a book called Folks, This Ain't Normal. And it's so funny because he talks about how far away we've gotten from basic agricultural practices, and this whole industrial food revolution is what we now consider normal. And yet, we don't even blink at glyphosate or Monsanto GMOs or dioxins in our food, or hooking our animals up with antibiotics and pesticides, or even just the monocropping concept, or grass-fed, grass-finished concept. I mean, it's so wild how far away we've gotten to how food has been available to us for thousands of years. Yeah.
And in your estimation, is that why cancer is now the second leading cause of mortality? Because of all these different factors coming together. And we're seeing that cancer rates, you talk about in the book a lot in the first chapter, in children are increasing dramatically. And then the amount of sugar that kids have, and parents seem to think it's normal. Oh, they're kids, they run around, they can burn it off.
Or
like,
don't deprive them of their cupcakes and their Fruit Loops. We get into this other sort of...
They need to be kids.
I know. It's like, well, when you think about it this way, in the late 1800s, early 1900s, we were ingesting 5 pounds of sugar per person per year on average. In 2014, studies showed that we're ingesting 175 pounds of sugar per person per year. Talk about metabolic and what the fuel source we're giving our mitochondria. It can't handle that change that fast. If you look at kind of a 24-hour clock and you look at industrial food industry of how we know it today, it's about 5 seconds old on that 24-hour clock. So our bodies can't keep up with what we're being exposed to. We are, you talked about this being the second leading cause of death, cancer. In the European Union, 12 countries now have cancer as the number one cause of death. They expect to have that as the number one cause of death in this country by 2020.
Wow.
Okay, that is changing. It's winning the race, unfortunately. And 1 in 2 men, 1 in 2.4 women in the United States will have cancer in their lifetime. This is why we wrote this book. This is frankly bullshit. We have got to do something about it, and we cannot keep our head in the sand around it anymore. And so we have to make changes, because even us eating what we call now a low carb diet is actually probably still a high carb diet in comparison to what we were eating 100 years ago. Or if we go low carb, it's probably now more like normal diet compared to what we were eating 50 years ago. So we've made all of these changes and our chemistry can't keep up with it. Our mitochondria are being overrun by big sugar bombs So, yeah.
So much stuff. A lot comes to mind there. But that gender disparity, I was surprised by that, because if you look at the obesity research on overweight, that women tend to be, for a variety of hormonal issues, tend to be a little bit more overweight than men and so forth. So have you dove in, like, trying to parse that out? What's the difference there?
Well, it's interesting because I would have thought the same as well, because also the estrogen component. But what they're saying, or at least some of the research I've seen, and I don't know for sure because it's in its infancy. No one's really dug deep into this conversation. But what we think is happening, why men are having a more difficult time, is because they are being bathed in estrogen for the first time ever. And their bodies don't know how to sort of compensate for that. So they're getting the sugar whammy and the estrogen whammy. Well, at least the women have already, the estrogen has been kind of part of their process for some time, even though we're all being bathed in it as well now, as on top of that. But I think that it's just the male body just can't deal. It just doesn't know what to do with two heavy hitters that are new to its system. And that's one of the theories that's been out there. And then I've also, with the inflammatory processes, men tend towards more of the cardiovascular. They tend towards being more metabolically inflexible, and they tend towards more of the issues that we talk about in metabolic disease, whether it's diabetes or heart disease. And now we're kind of finding on that same thread that includes Alzheimer's and cancer as well. These are all mitochondrial dysfunction. So I think that women, since we've had to pass down our mitochondrial DNA to propagate, if you will, and keep going, I think our DNA, our mitochondria tend to be a little bit stronger. And I think that the men's, it tends to be a little bit more, like a little bit weaker on that level. So it's kind of, and again, I could probably people coming after me for having that conversation, but it's just, I don't think we have studies to show it, but it's just things I think about, because it's the mitochondrial DNA that is where we get a lot of our disease processes from, but it's also what propagates the most.
Sure.
So it's interesting.
Yeah, and I think generally women are more health conscious than men. I think that's a huge
element.
That's huge. And I can see that a lot of my guy friends eat. Well, they think they're eating healthy. Like we talked about the triple wash spinach and so forth because it's organic, but I think women are generally a lot more health conscious. So that plays a big role. Yeah,
if you're an alternative healthcare provider, 80% of your population is typically women. It tends to be the way it is. So that's another really good point. So I think there's a lot of reasons. Yeah.
Brilliant. Cool. We're kind of talking about the link between autoimmune disease and cancer and the high prevalence of autoimmunity and cancer, and kind of how is that feeding into this notion? Because if we go back and look at some of the autoimmune research, there's now, it's kind of interesting, I've never thought about it this way, but we're talking about the metabolic origins of cancer, and there's this whole field of meta-inflammation, and this idea that autoimmune diseases and chronic, low-grade, smoldering immune-mediated disorders have a huge metabolic component. And even as integrative practitioners, we look at the immune system and T regulatory cells, TH1, TH2, TH17, and forget that all these cytokines that are ascribed to those pathways are upregulated via metabolic dysregulation. So is that the kind of, what's the correlation there with?
Huge. Well, I think it's, whenever I talk about the immune system with anybody, whether this is going into cancer or autoimmunity or just immune deficiency, you have to remember the 3 R's. So you've got that recognition. You go, ooh, there's a problem. Then you have the response. So, hey, let's do something about that problem. And then you have the remembrance, the memory of saying, hey, that little bastard's back again. What are we going to do about it? So if you have any one of those 3 off kilter, you've got problems in how your body it keeps surveillance and takes care of business, if you will. So with autoimmunity, most of the time that's really amped up in one of those 3 or all 3 of those. In cancer, those often are all 3 depressed. On the teeter-totter of immune function, you have that TH1, TH2 balance. And when you're in an extreme autoimmune flare, you tend to be TH1 dominant. When you're in an extreme cancering process, you tend to be TH2 dominant. Now, that used to be the textbook. That's what we all saw 20, 30 years ago in medicine. You could almost easily say, oh, you're TH1 dominant, oh, you're TH2 dominant, and it was that simple. But because of a lot of other things, probably going back to our microbiome, because we know that the microbiome is very immunoregulatory, immunomodulating, and in fact, a lot of people say that's our whole GALT system, everything else starts there. That's where the main immunomodulation starts and ends, is in our gut, and what we feed it, is that we now have a tendency to be either TH1 or TH2 dominant, but we can also be both TH1 and 2 dominant, which is what I'm seeing more and more and more of. I would say probably 80% of my severe cancer patients also are contending simultaneously with an autoimmune process. And then you can also be both TH1 and TH2 depleted. And those are really, those are folks who have IgA deficiencies and that are just, there's no more immune system left, or people who've done so much conventional therapy or an immunosuppressive therapy that there's just nothing left in the building, and then we're really in trouble. So those are the types of things we're seeing today more than ever, and so many things in our diet and our lifestyle impact that teeter-totter greatly. And so when I think about how do I approach this in someone who's got a wild bucking teeter-totter, I go for the center. And that center post is, again, I try to keep it simple. So things like vitamin D. That's why it's so important. It really works on that T helper, 3 regulatory cell right in the center of that teeter-totter that just balances things, immunomodulates. Another thing that works on that beautifully is ketogenic diet. Works right on that center post. Or even just low carbohydrate. Like when you can create that metabolic flexibility again, you sort of stabilize that bucking broncho. Vitamin A, vitamin K, fish oil, probiotics. Those are the ones that come to mind that are from our nutrients, and notice there's a lot of fat-soluble nutrients there. So we've done some disservice with our fat-free craze of the past bad experiment of the last 40 years or so. And then other things like outside of conventional therapies, things like mistletoe extract seem to work beautifully. Low-dose naltrexone seems to work beautifully on the center of that teeter-totter. So that's where I start to focus with that instead of guessing, oh my God, are they TH1 or TH2 dominant? Oh, are they dealing with a macrophage 1 or macrophage 2 process? Oh my God, is this an endocannabinoid issue of CB1 dominance or CB2? I mean, you can see that we could go down so many rabbit holes of getting so specific. So I like to keep it simple, and I like to focus on the center of just restoring rhythm, restoring balance, restoring a more stable teeter-totter in the whole.
That's brilliant.
Yeah.
And one thing that we talked about, a lot of those phytonutrients have been shown to kind of, you said the TH3 or the Treg cell.
Yeah, Treg.
Curcumin and resveratrol, at least in animal models at this point, which is really cool.
Yeah.
And then kind of what you were talking about when it comes to eating real food, fiber. Dietary fiber is key. So all these things just kind of weave in, which is really, really cool. But one thing that keeps coming to mind is people, when they talk about going low carb, or even cancer patients that are trying to maintain high levels of ketones, do they get wary of eating more of these different vegetables? And what would you say to them? Because some people will comment on some of these videos that we've done, oh my gosh, you eat onions or you eat broccoli, and it's oh man, we gotta talk about this, friends.
Yes, and I'm so glad because that's the other thing. I'll look at someone. I mean, first, this is such a big one. When I started working with folks, just to back this up further, when I was first dealing with my own cancer diagnosis and doing my own treatment, I became I will call it militant vegan, because because my life depended on it. And in 25 plus years ago, that was the only information that was out there for treating cancer. Right? That was it.
Let's pause and talk about your cancer a little bit, delve into what type of cancer and stuff, and then we'll talk about. I think that's important.
You want me to go there now?
Yeah, let's do it. That's brilliant.
Okay, so talking about, so the kind of the premise of this whole book is pretty much my life story. So when I look at where I grew up near an Air Force base, lots of toxicity. If you do scorecard.org and you type in the zip code in which I grew up, there were so many toxicants that I was exposed to, from heavy metals to benzenes to all kinds of things. My epigenetics, we didn't even have this information until a few years ago. And to get my epigenetic report and see my methylation detox pathways, it's a miracle I'm here today. I remember showing Ben Lynch once at a conference, the first one he did, with name marked out, I showed him this, and he's like, well, that person's fucked. Oh my gosh. I can see it. And I was laughing, and he's like, that was probably you. I'm like, Yeah. And, it looks like just a blood splatter of red. Homozygous everything, no GST. It's amazing, some of the things. To me, what's most amazing about my body and those that I work with is that we can overcome some big exposures in our lives. Growing up with a lot of emotional trauma and abuse and toxicity there, that was another huge underpinning for me. Major illnesses. I was born, sick. My mom's like, she said I used to kick the ashtray off her belly, and when I was in there, I'm like, I'm still trying to kick the ashtray off her belly. All these years later, I was allergic to every milk. She didn't breastfeed. So my microbiome, luckily I came through her vagina, so that was helpful, So I got one inoculation of good microbiome, but basically from the get-go, they tried every single formula and put me on finally soy formula, which destroyed my endocrine system. And so by the time I was, I started menstruating at 9.
Wow.
And I'm 45 now, so 9-year-olds today menstruating isn't as weird as it was back in the 70s and 80s, right? So that was definitely something going wrong with my chemistry, knowing what I know now. So pretty much every of the terrain 10 I talk about in the book, I had extreme examples of my own imbalance. By the time I was 14, I was diagnosed with cervical cancer, again at 16. And by the time I was 19, I was diagnosed with stage 4 ovarian cancer. They'd missed it for over a year because I was 19. No one was looking down that. We didn't know about BRCA gene back then. We didn't know about any of these things, which later, in 96, I was one of the first people when they started looking for the BRCA gene to be tested and to realize, oh, look, there it is. There's the positive, gene. And all these other pieces along the way, I've been my own living lab, my own living example of this. And accidentally bumped into things that worked and lots of things that didn't work over the years, which is what has made me kind of just a life learner, and to always be seeking to be out of the statistic, to always be the outlier of everything. Probably why I chose a profession that I did as well, because I was originally going to go to conventional medical school. That's actually where I kind of, in the midst of one of my organic chemistry tests, I passed out from pain of a cyst rupturing on my ovary, which is where we started doing deeper testing. And I finally, a year into it, had a doctor run a CA-125 and couldn't figure out, everyone thought I was pregnant, but it was ascites. 9 liters, no, 8 liters actually, at that time, all kinds of crazy things going on. And I was very much on my way out. I was incredibly cachectic. I was incredibly sick, extremely anemic. My ferritin was 3.
Oh my gosh.
I know. I was like, I couldn't breathe. I was here at elevation. And so I was like, my oxygen levels were around in the 70s. I mean, it was amazing. I didn't just outright die. That's why they told me I couldn't do any treatments, because they thought they would kill me.
Wow.
At that
So you were
time.
kind of lucky in the sense that the disease had progressed that much.
So much. And so because I'm a bit stubborn, when someone tells me I can't do something, that usually fires me up. And so at 19, it definitely did, because I didn't know better. Naivete was also on my side. And that sent me, in fact, the very first book I picked up at the library was Quantum Healing by Deepak Chopra. Well before Deepak was Deep Pocket Chopra, well before he became who he is today. But that completely changed my degree from a biology, chemistry, dual major, pre-med, to a biology psychology major. So actually psychology major with a biology minor, and basically I constructed it into a psychoneuroimmunology major, which also was not discussed back then. It was just coming into the forefront of our awareness. So it became my life's work, to keep myself alive and to learn what I could about my process and to keep learning more and more for my patients. I wish I knew then what I know now, but this information simply didn't exist. I mean, I tell folks today all the time that what I've learned in the last 2 years with regards to cancer is more than I learned the 23 years cumulative prior to that. It's incredible what's happening now. And so whenever I hear people, talk about, integrated medicine doesn't work or nutrition doesn't work, I'm like, God, I wish you'd get out of the way of the people that are making it work, that are living. I wish you could really see. And that's where I fell in love with like Kelly Turner's work on radical remission, who actually wrote the foreword to our book, because she's cataloged tens of thousands of cases of people who healed miraculously from dire circumstances, that not that they didn't choose a Western medicine perspective, but that the Western medicine perspective didn't work for them. And they were left to their own devices, as was I. And I keep meeting more and more of these people along my journey. And it's incredibly inspiring to see that we have a lot more ability to heal ourselves than we're led to believe.
Yeah.
And
you talk about that, like the participation and really like being engaged and involved in the process is key. And so I think that's kind of another core theme that's different about your book from the traditional route. The traditional route is like, okay, the onus is on all the doctors and stuff. You just show up, get your infusion, go home, eat whatever you want, no big deal. But you're saying, no, you have to look at your life history, your life story. You have all those questionnaires, which I think are awesome. That's really cool to go through. And no one would have thought like being raised near a military base or lead in your water and all that, like the epigenetic questionnaire. So I think that's really key to get people, even if, if they don't have cancer or a strong family history of cancer, they can look at, okay, where is the puck going potentially, right? And how serious should they take the dietary changes?
Totally. And every little step you can make helps every little step. It's like, I tell people, it's like, you just get rid of your, like, I'm happy to see you're drinking out of your glass water bottle. Like, just simply making that switch. No longer accept your receipts anymore. Tell them, just email it to you. I mean, those weird little things. It's like anything you can do to start to lower your toxicant exposure is going to make a huge difference in how your mitochondria respond. Because those poor guys, those little mitochondria are being hit with so many, just day-to-day nutrient medications affected. So even aspirin is a mitochondrial poison, even, NSAIDs of any other kind as well. I mean, the things we just eat, like M&Ms, right? We're just popping and like it's nothing. You're like, oh, just take Cipro prophylactically. I mean, one of the worst mitochondrial poisons on the planet. Wow. It's insane. And so we're finally learning. There's an entire I think I have it in the book, but there's an entire website of the list of known mitochondrial poisons. It's thousands long, and they're basic things we take or ingest or are exposed to or put on our body or in our body every single day. So again, the miracle to me is how well we can overcome. Right. But man, if we just give it a little nudge, a little bit of support, we can make such a difference. Such a difference. It is.
There's so much in the book. But you talk about in the book that, and we don't want to wish cancer on anyone, but you talk about in the book that cancer can be a really good teacher. So knowing all this, having had been through this, would you take it back? If you could rewind the clock, say, okay, life is going to go in this direction or that, cancer-free or not, which one would you pick?
This sounds so weird. I get a little emotional even thinking about it. I cannot imagine my life without it. I can't imagine it without it. Yeah. I can't imagine going and just popping, I was going to go to Baylor Medical School. I was like, that was my plan, and to think about writing scripts for my whole life and not really getting to know my patients inside and out, what makes them tick, to not have those intimate relationships, to not even have the opportunity to be with somebody in their sickest, darkest moments, and even on their way out of this world. At the level in which I get to do that today, I can't imagine anything more gratifying than the work I get to do now. And it would not have happened without my childhood traumas, without the chemical exposures, without living on canned cream corn and Cheerios and white bread and cinnamon toast. It's like that was my upbringing of a latchkey kid raised, my mom doing an amazing job, the best that she could, of trying to keep a roof over our head. And so that meant eating really crappy, fast food, very processed food. It was like there was no other way this process, me sitting here in front of you today, could have happened without walking that path. And I'm very grateful for it.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I think the hardest part, so I recently had several family members, and distant friends and so forth with the diagnosis. I think the hardest part is just mentally getting over the fact that like you have this disease which kills a lot of people, right? So how do you help people find meaning and purpose in that, and like instead of like create all the shame and guilt and all that and those negative emotions, and then just knee-jerking into the quickest therapy? Oh, I just got to get chemo. Like, how do you help people mentally? I'm sure that's just as hard as it is with the diet and everything else.
It is. And, I tell folks the main emergency, the medical emergency of cancer is the diagnosis. And that's kind of shows somebody what they're made of in that moment. Once they're diagnosed, the response is often indicative. You might have an initial knee-jerk reaction, or you might go, like rage or complete and utter shock or shut down or expand out. Everybody does it differently. What we try and take people on the journey is because there is that fine line of people saying, well, it's because I did this, and this, so it was my fault. That can lead to this weird shame, blame, guilt place. What we try and suggest in the book and the work we do with our patients is this concept. Gary Forsman, medical doctor that I've gotten to know recently, he called it perfectly what I would call it today. He calls it neutral self-inquiry. Of just saying, let me just take a bird's eye view of my life, of the journey up to this point, and see what might have contributed to this that I wasn't aware of. And now that I have some awareness of what that is, I can start to change it. That is very empowering. That shifts the energy of what is it that I can do now? What information do I have now that I didn't have? Where can I go with this? Versus the person who's sitting there just saying, hook me up and pour it in.
Zap me.
Very different world. And even folks as far back as Bernie Siegel's work back in the 80s, Love, Medicine, Miracles, he was showing in his research that people in support groups, women with breast cancer in support groups far outlived the women who did not have a support group. So there was something about engaging with others, connecting with others, taking, then also he showed the research of the bigger pain in the ass you are to your doctor, the more likely you are to survive. So the more questions you ask, the more involved you are. So I always tell my patients, I want you to be that patient. I want you to ask me questions. I want you to push me. I want you to push all of your healthcare team in the same manner of being engaged and understanding this process. And whenever we've done retreats, this material that's in the book is what we taught at the retreats, and they would always say, knowledge is power. And having this information, this understanding and awareness changes the outcomes drastically. So I see different outcomes for patients with stage 4 cancer. Western medicine says you'd have a 5 to 12% chance of still living here in 5 years with that diagnosis, no matter what the tumor type is. In my statistics, again, I'm collecting them mentally for 20 some years, it's closer to 50 to 70% of those people still here 5 years out. That's a big difference.
Yeah.
People don't ask me, well, what are you doing differently? But my patients will tell you they're doing their homework. They're doing the work. They're the ones making the changes. I'm just simply shining some light on some areas that were previously unknown to them. And again, I love that concept of neutral self-inquiry. It's like they get to explore, get to go on a little adventure. I'm still 25 years out as of October 21st from that diagnosis. I still learn new things about my chemistry, about what makes me tick, what makes me thrive, and what takes me back every single day.
That's brilliant.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's so key. So you talked about being the big pain in the ass with the oncologist potentially. So I read a recent study in elderly subjects in the nursing home, and the ones that survived were individuals that were very picky eaters and were saying, no, I don't want that, I want to do this, and I'm going to walk when I want to walk. The point is you could replace cancer with autoimmunity, with depression, with Alzheimer's, with obesity. So many people just want the protocol, want the turnkey, give me the solution, and that maybe the solution would work, or the pill, or the supplement, the exogenous ketones, but just by being a rebel slightly, right, and customizing it to your biology is so key. So I think this is a huge, because to be honest, I love nutrition, I love all this, but it gets boring to talk about because it's the same stuff. This mindset shift, I think, is what people need to hear more, because people know really what to eat intuitively. Yeah. But it's that mindset shift of customizing it to their lifestyle, which is so, and you hit on it really, really well. Yeah. Okay, so we talked about a lot of things, which is really, really cool. Thanks for being vulnerable and sharing your story.
Thank you.
That's really, and congratulations on 25 plus years. Yeah. It's key.
Yeah.
So we have 4 final questions we ask every guest on the show, but anything about the book that we didn't really talk about? There's a really cool herb that I wanted to share with everyone in the show notes. Yeah. I'm going to botch the name.
The Epazote?
Epazote. Yeah. Maybe let's definitely talk about that.
So, in trying to find, we talked earlier on about finding foods that maybe you haven't been exposed to before, or that have a historical, kind of ancient heirloom kind of history. Whenever you can introduce these things, it's introducing things to your microbiome. It's increasing. It's also it's a very kind of that's not the word pungent. What's the word? Bitter. It's got a bitter. Of course, in Chinese medicine, bitter is what treats cancer. So it's got a bitter component, but it's also a high fiber, and it's got some of the fructo, feeding of the microbiome nutrients within there as well. But it's an herb that you actually see quite a bit of in South America, Central America, Mexico. Not really much in our culture unless you brought it up from a Latino culture, but it's something that is very, we use fennel, fenugreek, those types of things people are sometimes aware of, but that bitter is also helpful for digestion. It's a great one to start to bring into any of the places where you might use fennel or cumin or fenugreek. So from fenugreek from India, cumin from, for a lot of different cultures use cumin, and then a lot of fennel in maybe the Northern European places. This is one of those foods that has been part of our diet in a lot of places for a long time as a bitter and digestive support. So you can weave that into your diet like you would any of those other herbs. And I think just doing exactly that, reading, and whenever you go travel, read up on what is some traditional dishes. So when I travel, I try to always find something very local and regional to eat wherever I go. And I'm always exposed to something brand new. And I usually bring home those spices or bring home some new ideas and recipes and try and match them as closely as possible to what we have in our own grocery stores or farmers markets.
That's
and so Epazote might be a fun one to explore.
Totally.
Yeah.
There was another one, apricot seed kernels. Yeah, talk about that.
Yeah, so apricot seeds, and even the family of apple seeds to some extent, just very small extent, and then even almond, kind of the core of the almond, have a component in them known as laetrile. Okay, some people have heard of it as B17. It's had a lot of controversy over the years. Ralph Moss has done a documentary and a book on it about its sort of buried data of being a good anti-cancer agent. And basically this is, it's got a little bit of cyanide in it, right? Again, that hormesis we talked about early on, that tiny little amount is enough to sort of stress the cells so that they respond favorably and have a metabolic, your healthy cells can adapt and sort of respond and react, but your cancer cells sort of wither and get bombarded and shrivel under the stress of that. So there are people who will take high doses of this, which I would be very careful and cautious of. You can do it intravenously. There's other ways to approach it. There's a lot of controversy. You actually can test to see if someone will respond to this or not. But as far as like a hormetic little here and there, just again, and expanding an extra fiber into your life and other foods that have some natural anti-cancer qualities, munching on a few of these apricot kernels, I don't know, like 3 or 4 a couple times a week are great little hormetic little reminders to your body to keep responding, recognizing, responding, and remembering what's going on. And so it's a great little addition. You can throw them into smoothies, you can put them in your trail mix, but you don't need more than just a couple. A lot of people talk about eating them in handfuls, but you can get cyanosis. So we don't want to go, I don't want to have anyone doing that. I will tell a funny story. One of my naturopathic colleagues, who's really well known in the world of teaching biochemistry and nutraceuticals and really loved by the naturopathic community, came in late one day to one of my nutrition classes when I was in medical school, apologizing for being so late, but he said that the night before he'd eat an entire bowl of apricot kernels just to see what would happen. And he's like, so in the middle of the night when I was tripping my balls off, and our entire class is just literally like, what? So he takes living laboratory experiment to the next level, but it was so fun to see that we were all playing, we were just experimenting with these things. And what was nice to know is it didn't kill him, but it was also really just funny to hear that story.
That's
so
hilarious.
A little bit goes a long way.
Yeah, so just pulse it in, you don't need a whole bowl.
Exactly.
Do you smash it like with a hammer like a coconut, or you just chew it?
You can chew them. I'll give you a little sample before you leave today of that to see, but it looks like a really big, like pepita, like a big pumpkin seed, it kind of looks like that. And it tastes like almond extract. So it's you can just kind of go, okay, well, no wonder it's part of the almond family and some of those things. You can taste the medicine.
Love it. So those things that we would throw away, kind of think garbage, or in the compost maybe.
Yeah.
What about avocado seeds? Do you chew those up?
Yeah, a lot of put them in a blender. So there's a lot of that. So you can roast them, and they taste really good roasted. They kind of remind me a little bit of a what do we roast it?
Chestnuts?
Yes,
Yeah.
That's exactly. When I first had one roast, I thought, that tastes like a chestnut. It was really wild. But you can blend it into a smoothie. And a lot of people say there's some anti-cancer components to that as well, which is pretty interesting. And given that avocado fruit itself, the flesh, is so nutrient dense and rich in essential fatty acids, the seed, which is going to be where the real magic of essential fatty acids lives, it makes sense to me that this would be something else we might want to ingest.
Right.
Yeah.
And there's no way that our ancestors would just toss it away.
No way. We've always done like the nose to the tail, and like we've eaten every part of an animal and every part of a plant, from its leaf to its seed to its root, all the way around. We've just gotten so like monocropped on everything. We've kind of like left out the important things.
Yeah.
So
you talk about that a lot in the book.
We do.
About eating organ meats and the power of that.
Yeah.
And a key thing this in integrative medicine or whatever, or paleo nutrition, we talk about that the liver stores all these toxins. And I'd love to tell us why that's not true.
Well, it's a filter. It filters it out. I mean, that's the thing, is it's like it takes it out of the body. It doesn't store it. So it has all of these, enzymes and pathways to get it out of the building. And so when we think about it being so toxic, well, it's a pass-through. It's not a storage tank. And so that's the place where we tell folks that, well, if it's able to sort of cleanse, purify, and break down things and get it out, well, then it's probably got some nutrient density to it. And we can't even get, I mean, I was so anemic for so long that I still am. Today, I'm pretty excited if I can get my ferritin into double digits.
Wow.
I know, right? So it's amazing. I can live at altitude and function even as well as I do. But I was able to get years and years and years ago liver injections. Well, we can't get them anymore, because they're like, oh, it's just you can't get a clean quality, and it's just you just can't get it. You can get it in some countries, out of the U.S., and I try and stock up when I'm traveling. But I'll take the cap. But I felt such a difference when I could get an injection of liver extract. It was immediate, it hurt like hell, I'll tell you that. I am.
Wow.
Yeah. Ooh, God. It was a painful one, I'll tell you that much, but it was really powerful to get that charge, because you're getting, when I think about liver, it's sort of that ultimate superfood. As much as I was a vegetarian too long to eat it knowingly. So if you can hide it in like a good pate, or if my husband can make it and not tell me I'm eating it, I can handle it just fine. But when I think about it, not so fine. But it's loaded with vitamin K2, and the selenium, the zinc, the vitamin A, the vitamin D. It's loaded with so many of those nutrients that we just have to work so much harder to get access to today. And it's something that we, again, throw it away. Yeah. Just discard it. It's disgusting. It's a big storage dump or whatever. It's we've put a little myth around it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's the texture thing. It is kind of hard to eat. It does taste kind of, so it's an acquired taste. You got to
Some
play
people
with it.
love it. My mom, my husband, they love it.
Yeah.
They love it. I'm like, well,
can't really do it.
It's like I said, I've got some friends up the valley, James Ranch. They're a great, that's where actually some of the cheese you ate for breakfast this morning, they're raw cheese and whatnot. But she made a recipe and recommend putting in like dried prunes.
Oh wow!
Into it, because because it has a weird. It's considered sweet meat, right? So putting that in that and onion. That's what people always do with the liver and onions. There's something about that flavor kind of cuts it. So if I have it in a pate form like that, that's with those blended, the taste is completely palatable. I just don't like to think about it.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. You really can't. Final kind of question here that comes to mind from the book that I think is amazing, by the way, guys, is this idea of cyclical ketosis based upon seasonality. You talked about, kind of in the book, like hunter-gatherer humans, like they weren't having berries and stuff in the winter. So it's natural to be more ketotic maybe in the winter, and then when the fruits and the root tubers are available in the summer, eat those. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, when we're dealing with somebody therapeutically in a window of diet, we can use it like a medicine, like a chemotherapy, and we can come in and keep them on it until things stabilize or regress. As far as because the ketogenic diet itself is shown to be pro-apoptotic, anti-inflammatory, stalls growth, proliferation. Or at this point, Adrian Scheck's work out of Barrows in Arizona shows that out of the 10 hallmarks of cancer, it affects at least 6 of them that we've got research on right now. So we know it has some good implications. As far as, is this a good idea to be on it forever? I don't think it is. I just like anything, we can go extreme on a lot of things, because naturally we weren't always in ketosis. Just exactly as we talked about in the book, that will be seasonal. And I was just thinking about this morning as I was waking up at, about 4:45 when the sun starts to come up here. I was like, oh crap, I'm up. Thinking about how we can tolerate to eat more carbohydrates because we have longer days, lighter days. We can be, historically we were more physically active from this time the sun came up to the time the sun went down. So when you have that kind of sun exposure and you have the bulk of the sweet foods in that window, we're burning it up, or at least we should be historically. And in the winter, when the days are really short, you're in bed, you're cold, you're down, you're simplifying. It's like a little bit of meat, just really basics there of things that can preserve well through the winter. You're not having access to all those sweet bombs, and the carbohydrates. So I just love how this going back into we have a whole chapter on circadian rhythm and the patterns of seasons and whatnot. And today we're completely overfed and undernourished, and we have access 24/7 to light and to grocery store 550,000 choices of cereals and all the different things around us. We just never turn it off. And when I hear people, cry that they are skipped 2 hours, they're hungry or they're bonking or they're hangry, we know that they're metabolically inflexible at that time. So we should naturally be able to easily go from dinner to breakfast time without needing to eat. A new study just came out recently about women who simply fasted 13 hours. 13 hours is nothing. It's dinner to breakfast, people. I mean, it's nothing. Had a lower recurrence of breast cancer than those who were having a snack at bedtime or ate, in the middle of the night for whatever reason. That's not even, that's
you don't
not
have to try really or change your lifestyle.
And if you
much.
really were metabolically flexible, having your dinner, going to bed and eating 12 to 16 hours later, you should naturally be in low grade ketosis. Naturally, we don't go there anymore. So we have to push ourselves now. We have to kind of force it a little bit. So, it's okay to feel hunger.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're right. So many people that don't practice low carb, high fat diets they can't go very long without food. And I've experienced that with friends and family. It's like, oh my gosh, we got to eat, spend 2 hours. And I'm thinking I couldn't even think about eating right now. What? We ate similar breakfasts. Oh, but you had the bagel. Yeah. So that induces that metabolic inflexibility that we're.
And I used to be very metabolically inflexible. I was the person eating every 2 to 4 hours for years and taught my patients how to do that because I just assumed that's how we all were. And then as I started playing with my own system that much more and learning, started to realize, very different. We're seeing longevity in people who are, caloric restricting. We see a longer, life cycle, if you will, for that. So all of Longo's work on longevity medicine and how you can upregulate mitochondria and healthy stem cell function just by simply fasting. You can turn your entire immune system around in 3 days of not eating. Yeah, that's why we have the flu, I think. It's like, as you get sick as hell and you don't eat for 3 days and you basically just given yourself a systems upgrade. Right. I wish we could just do that naturally. And I try and encourage my patients to get to the point where they can do that without feeling scared or deprived or overwhelmed. But you got to work towards it.
Yeah. Brilliant.
Yeah.
Okay, so the first one, we know that successful people, busy practitioners, authors, influencers have a morning routine. What's the first couple hours of your day look like?
Oh, I love this question. So today I got up at about 5 a.m. and started my far infrared sauna and got my first cup of coffee because I am a coffee girl. Luckily, I have a fast metabolizer of coffee, so I can handle it. Got on the Vibe. I have a little, I call it my own bulletproof coffee experience. I make myself into a bulletproof coffee with that for 15 minutes while the sauna is heating. And then I hop into that and meditate for 30 minutes in the far infrared sauna. And then I go upstairs and take a steam and shower all those toxins out of my body. And then go for a nice walk just to get everything moving and then dive into work, emails. And usually I won't eat until usually around 11-ish is a pretty typical thing for me. And it's something more light. And then, that's kind of it's just this easy start. That's a typical day. On the other days, I become addicted now to cryotherapy. So like tomorrow morning, I will get up. I'll actually go for a really hard, high intensity workout tomorrow morning for about 30, 40 minutes. I've got my whole sort of setup, TRX and everything upstairs, or I have a friend that she's my trainer and good friend that she'll kick my ass in the park or come over here and do it. And then I go do cryo, the 3 minutes of cryo afterwards, and usually come home and make a green drink after that and just kind of flush my tissues with that. So that's kind of my morning routine. I like to do, it's my self-care time. Totally. It's where it's the only time I can get it in because it won't happen any other part of my day.
Right. That's really good. I love that morning routine. That's awesome. There's something about cognitively when you do the sauna in the morning, like that brain derived neurotrophic effect or something really kind of kicks on.
Does. I'm on. And so then I'm ready to dive into my day.
Yeah. Brilliant. Okay. One herb, nutrient, or botanical that you just couldn't live without. Maybe you're stranded on a desert island. Omega-3s, vitamin D are covered. What are you bringing with you?
Wow. I would probably, boy, that's a tough one. Because I don't really take anything regularly per se. I get it all through my food, so that's it's a weird one.
Or one food then.
Okay.
One food that you just couldn't.
It sounds really crazy, but I would probably take olives.
Yeah.
Because it's my favorite food. It's nutrient dense. It's a little mini fat bomb. I love the salt of it. That would probably be the food of choice that I would take for that. And as far as if I had to pick an herb, I would take mistletoe, but it would be in an injectable form. Yeah. And so that would be, because it kind of hits everything else. So if I could take two things, it would be my olives and my mistletoe extract.
Brilliant. No one's mentioned that yet, so I love it.
Yeah, good.
Awesome. So if there's one exercise that you'd recommend to a cancer patient, or really anyone to prevent cancer, what exercise would that be?
I'm a huge fan of the high intensity interval. I mean, my worst nightmare patients that I saw historically were the vegan athletes, endurance athletes, because they were so oxidized, they were so broken down, their DNA was so damaged from the mitochondrial damage upstream from that. So I like folks to have little microbursts of high intensity. So if they're out doing a walk, then drop and give me 20 on push-ups or some good, bursts, like little bursts of running or jumping jacks along the way, just to give little bursts of it. That's what we did in nature for ever.
Yeah, love it.
Yeah.
All right, you're stranded in an elevator with a politician, maybe a senator, President Trump, or past President Barack Obama, someone that has influence over the populace at large. What health or lifestyle tip would you want them to know about so that they can influence other politicians to get them to think differently about treating the health of America or the world?
I think we need to think about food quality. I think we need to go back to what our parents and grandparents and great-grandparents were eating, and to get away from industrialization and get people back into growing their own food, growing gardens instead of giant monocrops.
Yeah, it's brilliant.
Yeah.
And giant lawns.
And giant lawns. Get rid of the lawn, tear it up. Our lawn out front here is the city property.
It looks fine.
We would never have it if it wasn't city property. The rest of our tiny little plot of land is covered with little mini gardens everywhere.
It's brilliant. Yeah, it's a talking piece. People love it. Kids love it. Gets the whole family closer to the food, which is key.
Gets you into your soil, so you're enhancing your own internal soil as well.
Yeah. Beautiful point. Yeah. So you have the great new book that's out. It's available. It's ready for folks listening to this right now.
Yeah.
You have your website as well. So if folks want to connect with you online, what's the best way to do that?
So on Facebook, you can follow me on Optimal Terrain Consulting Facebook page, but there's also a book page, the Metabolic Approach to Cancer Facebook page. We try and keep a lot of, hey, where are we going to be talking? What interviews have we done? What recipes or tips do we have? We really try and stay in dialogue and communication there. My website is optimalterrainconsulting.com. And I believe I'm still learning these things. I have an Instagram, which is Optimal Terrain. So those are places that people can follow me. I do a lot of education trainings for physicians and clients and patients and retreats worldwide.
Awesome.
So
you talked about the retreats a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah. I've been on a break this year while we were getting the book out, but they'll be starting back up again in spring 2018.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. Come and live it.
That's key. Yeah, to really induce that sweeping lifestyle change that's needed.
Yeah. Huge.
Love it. Well, thanks so much for coming on the show. Thanks for being vulnerable and sharing your story, which I think is powerful. Thanks for putting together this amazing book. Just want to have this moment of gratitude because I think that your book is amazing. I mean, it's a good resource that people are not going to get anywhere else. There are some, you mentioned like Keith Bach and some other older books that are out there, but this is like the 2.0 version where people, if they need a resource, it's very comprehensive, whether it's prevention or treatment, remission, this is the tool that they should get. So congrats on that.
Thank you. I feel like we've built upon great foundations of our predecessors, of our mentors out there. And I'm incredibly grateful to all the people who've helped teach me and keep me alive and healthy and vital. And then I feel like we just kind of are building on that and passing the baton forward. So thank you so much for this opportunity.
My pleasure.
Yay.
All right. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah.
Cheers.